Hi, y'all. I'm Atticus, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore and the host for tonight's event. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Kristina Gorcheva-Newberry and Julia Phillips to our At Home with Literati series in support of The Orchard. For our attendees, the chat is closed, but I'll be dropping links to purchase The Orchard throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to submit questions at any time. A reminder that you can shop for more books in-store or at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup and shipping to your home anywhere in the United States. And now, allow me to introduce tonight's author and moderator. Kristina Gorcheva-Newberry is a Russian-Armenian emigre who moved to the United States in 1995 after having witnessed perestroika and the fall of the Iron Curtain. Writing in English, her second language, she has published 50 stories and received 9 Pushcart nominations. Her work has appeared in All Story, Electric Literature, Indiana Review, The Southern Review, Gulf Coast, Tri-Quarterly, Prairie Schooner, Nimrod, and elsewhere. Gorcheva-Newberry is the winner of the Catherine Ann Porter Prize in Short Fiction, the Tennessee Williams Scholarship from the Sewanee Writers Conference, I shouldn't mess that one up, and the Prairie Schooner Raj Schumacher Book Prize in Fiction for her collection of stories, What Isn't Remembered, which was longlisted for the 2022 Penn Robert W. Bingham Award. She lives with her family, splitting time between New York, Virginia, and Russia. Julia Phillips is the debut author of the internationally best-selling novel Disappearing Earth, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. A Fulbright Fellow, Julia has written for the New York Times, the Atlantic, and the Paris Review. She teaches at the Randolph College MFA program and lives in Brooklyn. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kristina and Julia.
Atticus, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to Literati for having us. And Kristina, congratulations on your incredible debut novel, The Orchard. It's an honor for all of us to get to be here and celebrate this accomplishment with you. For folks watching, Kristina and I are going to have a conversation together, and then Kristina will start answering questions from you at about 8:15. So as Atticus mentioned, please do put any questions you have in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're really excited to hear your thoughts. The Orchard is an extraordinary book, a record of the last years of the Soviet Union that is both sweeping and specific, and an interrogation of how those last years continue to resonate up into the present day. It captures the universal ache of what it's like to be a teenage girl and the very particular loss of coming of age during perestroika. It's also very sexy, I think, which is my highest recommendation for any book ever. Kristina, would you mind telling us in your own words what this novel is about and reading a little bit from it?
Yes, thank you, Julia. This novel is about 4 friends coming of age in the 1980s when perestroika started and the dreams they have. And 20 years later, the protagonist returns back to Russia. And because her parents' dacha, including the apple orchard, is being gambled away, so to speak. So she's trying to prevent that from happening. And that's an allusion to Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard. I would be happy to answer any of the questions after the reading. As I did with my previous book launch, I wrote a few pages that I'm going to read today. It's on the theme of home. I think it's incredibly important today because millions of people lost their homes just in the past 2-3 weeks, and I think millions more will lose their homes. Also, the theme of home, the loss of home, is central to The Orchard. And so after I will read those few pages, which is like an opening into our discussion, I will then read just a few pages from the novel. And then we'll go with questions and answers. There is a place we all return to again and again in our conversations and dreams, stories and memories. It is the matrix of our existence, of all pleasure and pain. We can hardly acquire our identity without it because we are, after all, a comprised genetic memory of our heritage. We exist within that memory and that heritage. It isn't merely passed on to us, but is us, because it has shaped us before we had a chance to shape ourselves. It is home. For most people, home is a real place, one filled with friends and family and the shared experiences, the comfort of knowing who you were before becoming who you are. For others, home might be an idea, a safe, idyllic land they wish they knew or lived in, a warm house, a cooked meal, a clean bed, a blue lagoon of endless projections and fantasies, a coveted paradise. Yet for others, home can be a person, a parent, a spouse, a partner, a child, the dearest and the closest relation. Some writers say that for them, home is the language in which they create and take refuge, the language of the heart, of dreams and hopes, loss and longing, of their shared humanity. Likewise, some readers insist that books take them home, that they return to those books again and again because they feel at home with the characters, because having traveled that journey, they have finally arrived at a place where they can rest, take a breath of air, muse on the meaning of life. For many unfortunate people, however, home is a prison of iron rules and brutal, blinding dictatorship. They grow up terrified of the outside world, of what their government might do to them should they attempt to leave or share what they know. They're never free from fear or hunger or the urge to visit foreign lands. Their home, their cultural heritage, an ugly, monstrous rock tied to their shoulders and that they must carry until death. But for an expatriate, an exile like me, home is all things past, a country that no longer exists or exists somewhere very far on a weathered map of my childhood where life remains unchanged, not yet contended or condemned by future defeats. It is the place ascribed by heartache for all that is lost, but also the need to remember how things smelled or tasted or looked, the broken limbs of the dying apple trees, or the old dilapidated country house, or the way first snow clings to a window glass as though seeking shelter. It is the reluctance to let go of things that are at once private and timeless, the way memory is, and from which a writer always borrows an anecdote, a face, a gesture. Immigrant writers like me continue to search for their home abroad, continue to build on memory, or in some cases, to denounce it. But one never stops being an exile, no matter how welcomed or comfortable or fortunate she becomes in her newly adoptive land, because she remains addicted to the lost past. It is seductive in its nostalgia, viewed through a prism of years and distances, veiled with empathy in the yearning to bring it all back. My youth, my friends, our ambition to change the world, our dreams for a better, kinder, more peaceful future we fought for in the early 1990s. It seems so far away now, that future we failed to build, like a lost love or childhood friendship hovering somewhere on the outskirts of memory, folded away in the darkest, deepest chambers of the heart. One can never reach there or breathe life into it, strike a fire from ashes and snow. Toni Morrison once said, "A writer's life and work are not a gift to mankind. They are its necessity." So is my debut novel, The Orchard. It isn't a gift to my generation, but my duty, my obligation to those who have survived perestroika and all the bloody, merciless years that came afterward, the coups, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, the looting, the killings, the geopolitical gambling, my generation, my classmates, how proud we once were, how courageous and unwavering. Life has pulled us apart, swallowed us up in a turmoil of jobs, marriages, divorces, parenthood, immigration, loss, grief. We aren't as young or fearless anymore, and we're certainly no champions, having lost everything we have ever dreamed of. Once again, we are on the streets, protesting this horrific war waged against a neighboring state. Once again, we lost our country, perhaps forever now. But maybe if we protest now, if we remember those who died defending peace, we can still save the future generations from having to live in fear, to grow up ashamed of who they are as a nation, from having to apologize the way we did for their parents' mistakes, for their government's crimes against humanity. Thank you. I will now read a short passage from the novel. The conflict in this passage is just as relevant today as it was in the 80s or maybe even in the 1920s. It has never been resolved and maybe it can be resolved. All you need to know is that four friends, Anya, Milka, Lopatin, and Trifonov, are at Anya's dacha. Anya is the protagonist of the novel. The year is 1985. Perestroika has started. It is Easter night. The friends are trying to build a fire and celebrate. This passage also has an allusion to Chekhov's The Chariot. There are a few indecent words here, so I apologize in advance. The whole country is like your apple orchard, Trifonov said. But how did you come to own this land, Anya? Think about it. Your grandparents and great-grandparents were probably dutiful revolutionaries. They sang communist hymns and spied on their neighbors and friends to survive, to get ahead. And who can blame them? Those were the times, right? But they betrayed and buried many, walked on corpses. The dead are looking at you, whispering at you from every apple tree, from every branch. We owe our lives to the dead, and yet we haven't come to terms with our past. We don't know it. All we do is talk and get drunk. But to own our present, we must own our past. Stop your highfalutin bullshit, Trifonov, before I stuff a rag in your mouth and burn you at the stake, Lopatin shouted from the doorway. Your folks are just as guilty as mine or any of us. Everyone spied, and everyone killed, and everyone pissed blood when arrested. Now come out, look at this hot, raging beauty people, and bring beer and food. The fire kindled in the pit. Lopatin kept feeding it slivers of wood and paper we assumed he had found in the trunk. The flames climbed higher and higher, and he squatted, warming his ungloved hands over the burning logs. He fetched a stick from the split pile and poked at the wood, releasing a host of sparks. Lopatin's face glowed with a swing smile that also seemed malicious. His cheeks were grubby from not shaving, and his mussed hair stood up in clumps. His shadow hunched on the ground, and when he rose, it rose too, projected against the tool shed. He leaned over and picked something from the stump, tearing and scrunching the paper before feeding it to the fire. Nice and dry, he said. Milka passed him a sandwich while I handed him a beer. He poured half of the bottle down his throat, then took a ravenous bite and another. I popped a whole egg into my mouth. Trifonov was peeling an orange and tossing the peel in the fire, his long, delicate fingers separating the fruit into perfect, fleshy sickles. Even with the smell of burning wood, the air tingled with a sharp scent of citrus. Could you bring those tomatoes? Milka asked, and Trifonov rushed to finish his orange before ambling into the house. He emerged a moment later with a sandwich clamped between his lips and a jar of pickled vegetables under his arm. His coat hung open, and we could see his light brown sweater, threadbare and too short. Lopatin threw some wood into the pit and reached for more paper, but Trifonov, who had already placed the jar on one of the benches, caught his hand. Are you out of your mind? He asked, spitting the sandwich and lifting a book high above Lopatin's head. Are you burning Bulgakov? I tore a few pages, so what? You all read it, and Raneva gave the book to me on New Year's. I tried to read it, but couldn't understand shit. Heart of a dog? You can't turn a dog into a man. That's insane. That's all you got from it? Trifonov asked. I got plenty, but I don't need you to rub my nose in it. You're an ignorant peasant swine, Lapatin. Lapatin sucked the rest of his beer, then waved the empty bottle in the air, finally setting it on the stump. I am a pig. I don't deny it. But if you think my peasant grandparents are to blame for everything that happened to this country, think again. They didn't start it, weren't smart enough. It's your people who started this shit, and now it stinks all over. Fucking intelligentsia. Shall I remind you who the Decembrists were? Counts, princes, the royalty, the elite. They worried about dumb paupers, sweaty plebs, drunkards, wishing to turn them into something noble. Why? What if the mob didn't want to be educated or transformed? Did they think of that? Did they think that maybe it's as impossible to change a peasant into a prince as it is a monkey into a Homo sapiens, even though the functional portion of human DNA is 98.4% identical to that of chimpanzees? See, I have done my research, Trifonov, and you have done shit. So whose fault is it? Your people pretty much fucked up this country and then tried to blame mine, but it's over now. We'll build a new country, a new empire, plant a new orchard. Give me that book. Lapatin brought his hand out, but Trifonov stepped back and held it even higher than before. Lapatin tried to jump and snatch the book from Trifonov's hands, but missed, slipped, and fell in the snow. Stop it, Milka said. I hate it. You always ruin shit. How can you burn books, Lapatin? It's like burning these trees. They're alive. They have souls. If you don't understand it, that doesn't mean you should destroy it. You have a dog's heart, Lapatin, Trifonov said. You'll never be anything but a dog. This new country you're talking about, it won't happen until the last communist dog, the last KGB pig dies. Lapatin spat through his teeth and rose first to his knees and then to his feet. With a slow, deliberate gesture full of overt contempt, he brushed snow off his pants, wiped his hands on his coat, unbuttoned it, and shook it loose off his shoulders. His face was calm and bitter, dark thickening in his eyes. I could see a germ of loathing in them. His eyes were devoid of their usual, non-malicious fun-poking, but instead burned with mockery. It seemed as though he had always limped under the weight of his masks, but was now free from that weight and from the need to hide or counterbalance his hatred for Trifonov. Thank you.
Kristina, thank you so much for sharing both of those readings with us. Both of them are so true and essential in very different forms, in speaking your own truth and then telling us this fictional story. Both of them so true. I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about, you write about a bit at the end of the orchard, there's an author's note that goes a bit into the story behind the story, the real life experience that informed this novel's themes and approach and characters. And I think we can hear tonight, even if we haven't read the book yet, for those of us who haven't read the book yet, I think everyone can hear the direct connections between the world these characters occupy and the world we all live in right now today. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what inspired the orchard. What made you write it?
Well, the orchard, the novel, grew out of my short story, Champions of the World. And it isn't included in my collection. When I wrote the short story, a few people kept coming back to me, and I kept coming back to the story. And then later, actually, when I was visiting Moscow, I went to Moscow Art Theater, which is called MHAT, Russian, where Chekhov's play, The Cherry Orchard, had been staged for the first time. And I was watching the play again. And that is when I knew I would turn Champions of the World into the novel, because the conversations the characters had were eerie familiar to what my peers and I had in 1980s and then, in the early 90s. The interesting thing when Atticus introduced me saying that I split my time between Virginia, New York, and Moscow. Moscow probably should have been left off now. So I don't know if I'd ever be able to go back. But the story, the orchard, the characters, they're all fictional characters. However, of course, some of the conversations, I can't remember them exactly how they happened, but the echoes of those conversations that my friends and I had in the 80s and then early 90s, of course, are in the orchard, as well as the story of Milka. There's also truths in reality, but it is a fictionalized story. So I am hoping that when the readers finish the orchard, they do read the author's note, because it does speak directly about my experiences in the 80s when Perestroika started, and we were all teenagers, graduating, in fact, high school. And then, of course, early 90s during both coups. So
I have a quote from you from that author's note that I've been thinking about a lot over the past few weeks. As I read the news and as this event approaches, as your launch day has approached, your book came out yesterday. You wrote in the author's note, as a fiction writer, I have learned to deal not so much with events, but with the consequences of those events. It isn't enough to have an experience. To understand what it means, all the possible implications may take months and even years. And we're reckoning with so many implications right now, implications and outcomes, as you put it, that have been unfolding for years, for decades. Decisions made in Moscow that are changing and disrupting the world. Do you see your writing as playing a role in the cultural conversation, contextualizing this present day violence? Do you see that? Where do you see Orchard as fitting in for readers with the world in which we live right now?
Well, the interesting thing, also very horrific thing, that it all came back. So in a sense, there's also not just a loss of a country. I'm not talking about Ukrainian people. My God, they're trying to survive. I can't even comprehend what they're going through. I'm also talking about my generation, who has been through so much. And some of my friends who are now on the streets risking their lives again, just as they did in the 1991 and 1993, it all came back again. So there's a sense of a lost life, that everything you did or fought for, it's gone. Therefore, you feel like a loser. You did not accomplish anything with your life. And I don't think that, I don't know where we can go from here. Can we go anywhere? Because this war not only took away the future, it took away our past. Everything you fought for is gone. So, but as a writer, writers bear witness, so our work bears witness to what is happening. And so it also, builds bridges. I don't know what kind of work will come out now, during or after the war. The war will end. I am a firm believer. All wars end. It will end. There will be peace. What price people would pay for that peace, I don't know. I can't even comprehend. But as writers, we must speak out. We must, if not document, then bear witness. Because, in this novel, you may remember at the end when the character travels back to Moscow and she meets Lopatin again. And she tells him, nobody knows who we are. Generation Perestroika, in 50 years, people wouldn't even know we existed. And he insists that, but we exist now. But I think that's what writers do best. They create spaces where those broken, dead, forgotten can exist. I am a firm believer in kind of a parallel world, where I think you asked me once that how those three worlds that I recreated, right? The one in the 80s, and then the one in America, kind of a present, and then the one in Russia.
Yeah, you have these incredible three settings in the book.
Right.
The Soviet Union, the US, Russia.
Right.
They all feel so different. They're all so different.
Right. And I think it's because I allowed myself to live in those parallel worlds. There's Kristina Gorcheva, I wasn't new there, Kristina Gorcheva, who lived in Moscow in 1980s. And it's one girl in some plane, some of my memory, and maybe there are parallel universes. She still lives. So all those experiences, are there. And then there is another Kristina Gorcheva who became Kristina Gorcheva, and then Kristina Newberry, who came here, married an American man, and built a life, which is very different from the life I had there. But then there is another person who traveled back and contemplate the world in Russia from both points of view. Someone who lived there in the 80s, but also someone who's lived in the United States for now 27 years. But so there are different experiences, but they're all, they're based in reality. And so to be able to separate them, and it's like going back in time or back into the future. It's one of my, by the way, favorite films, Back to the Future.
I love that.
Yeah, to me, it's fascinating because somebody who is older, or younger, can go and visit their older, younger selves and give them advice. And wouldn't that be wonderful? If anybody could go and say, don't do this, because it will result in this situation. But, as writers, we can't do that. I think that's a privilege, really, that we can travel through time and our older selves can advise our younger selves, back in the fictional world. So
your book, The Orchard, captures so powerfully and sharply and painfully, I think, that experience of getting to cross worlds and getting to then revisit with the knowledge of, with the wisdom of experience, with the wisdom of age, and yet not being able to save anything or change anything, going back to Russia, but Russia is now not the country in which you grew up, and your friends are not there anymore. And what you've lost is not only the childhood you've grown out of, but the world in which that child existed, and you can't reach that person anymore.
Right.
And it is so they, of course, a cliche in writing classes, right, is that you find the universal in the specific. The more specific you get, the more universal the story is. And I believe the Orchard does that so perfectly. It's so profoundly specific to this time and place and experience. And through that, it connects to something that we all feel, to in some degree, in some setting, the feeling of wanting to go back to the future, the feeling of wanting to reconnect with the person that we were, the person we will be, and say, like, let me help you, let me correct this, but not being able to do that. I wonder, you spoke in your opening words about finding home in the language of your heart, the language in which you create. So The Orchard's your first novel, but it's your second book. It comes out on the heels of What Isn't Remembered, your beautiful story collection. You've had 2 books come out in the last year in English, written in English, am I correct? Both?
Both written in English.
So the original, like your first drafts are in English, you write, English is your, what is that like to write creatively in English? Obviously with such extraordinary skill and achievement. What is that like to, is it your home, the language of your heart, or what is that experience like? How did you come to it? And what do you find in it?
Well, I've been learning this language since the age of 8 because I went to special English school in Moscow. And I have said this before, but the first lesson I had, I came home and told my mom, I said, this is what I want to do to the rest of my life. She said, what? I said, English. She said, that's not a profession. And I said, well, what can I do? And she said, well, you can be a teacher, which exactly, that's the degree I got, a teacher of English. And, later when we had conversations, she could have never said writer, because, there were not that many women writing, and certainly not novels. So on one hand, I've been always fascinated by this language, what it can do. It's very strong. It's a language of the command because everything must be done by verb. And when I used to teach, I used to tell this to my students, you don't just, walk quickly or run, you have all those verbs, beautiful verbs that you can use. Well, Russian language can be very descriptive. It's also very beautiful, but very descriptive.
I'm having flashbacks to all my verbs of motion lessons in Russian class, the extraordinary challenge of that.
Right, so there are lots of adjectives, here, you go, it's like writing 101, again, like creative writing 101, they said, adverbs, no, you can't use adverbs, adjectives, sparingly. But in Russia, adverbs, they're friends, they're friends. So they're very different languages. However, I think maybe since I started writing here in English because one of my former professors told me I should. And growing up in the Soviet Union, I always listened to what my professors or my teachers told me, and I had to obey. So I said, okay. And therefore, I started writing in English. Maybe I can write in Russian. I don't know. I've never tried, but I love a good challenge.
You've never tried?
No, I've never tried.
That's incredible.
I've never tried, but it's fascinating to me, this language, or how the words come together in a sentence. There's the word order in sentences are very different in Russian and in English, right? But there's so much music in both languages, but it's a different kind of music. It's like, for example, if you compare classical music and jazz, which I love both, but it's very different, right? So if I were to write in Russian, I think I would be like a classical pianist. I would be sticking to the rules, right? In jazz, you're allowed to improvise. So for me, writing in English is like, improvisation in jazz. It's just lovely. And of course, I'm always learning things. I memorize words, pages and pages of words. Maybe not recently, but I used to for years. I would write them on sticky notes and I would paste them everywhere. And, also someone once told me, when you grow up, usually, a lot of adults regret two things: that they can't play an instrument or they don't know a foreign language. Well, I don't play an instrument, but I know a foreign language. So
you really know a foreign language, I would say.
And it's important. I just wish so many more people know other languages, because it's a form of communication, but also opens, it's like portal into a different world, It's one thing when you read something in translation. It's a completely different thing when you read something in its native tongue.
Do you read novels and short stories in both English and Russian these days, or do you read mostly in English?
I do read in Russian. They would be mostly things that some people might say old-fashioned, like, Chekhov, Tolstoy. I read Nabokov a lot, and what he wrote in Russian.
How interesting.
I read what he wrote in English a long time ago, but now I'm rereading things he actually wrote in Russian. So Vasily Grossman, I just reread some of his books, kind of timely. I like Lyudmila Ulitskaya. When she has something new, I try to get my hands on it. And there are a few contemporary Russian writers, and some of my friends, when I used to go back home, they would bring me books and they would say, "You've got to read this. This is great. This is excellent." And, I would always follow their advice and read some. Just as, when I would go there, a long time ago, I would bring Morrison's books, because they were still not there at the time. And so I was so excited, and I wanted my friends to read them who can read in English. And a lot of my friends can. They know English well enough to be able to read, American novels. So yes, I do read them both.
Will you make recommendations to us as your friends and your new friends, for those of us who don't know you? Will you make recommendations to us of books that you are really enjoying right now, or after The Orchard, after we finish The Orchard and What Isn't Remembered, what should everyone here buy next from Literati Bookstore?
So I am reading two contemporary, also Russian-speaking American authors. One is Katya Kazbek, Little Foxes Light the Matches. She and I are going to have an event in Center for Fiction. So I'm reading her novel. Also, Elena Gorochova's A Train to Moscow. So just finished that. It's a wonderful book. I will be at AWP, and we will be talking about short story collections. So I had to read all the collections that we will present during both panels. One is the reading panel. The other panel is build your own collection. So I read all those in this Michael Wang's collection, News of Further Defeat. It won Robin Bingham last year. It's just a wonderful collection. Rachel Swearingen's collection, Matthew Lansbury's collection, Outside of the Ocean, is wonderful. So I am either reading or rereading them. Carolyn Kim's collection also was a finalist, I believe, for Story Prize and Robert Bingham Prize. Jen Fox collection, my fellow from Hollins University, Tales the Devil Told Me. So all those collections will be discussed at AWP. So I did read or reread those. So that's what I've been reading lately.
That's a lot on your nightstand, I think. That's a lot of books you've been reading lately. I love that.
And one must read the New Yorker. So So the fiction.
Yes, that's always a very big pile, I feel like, of things. I wanted to ask you, thinking about the collections you've been reading and the talks about, the panels you're about to be on about collection or about collection assembly, that you just went to the Penn Awards for your long-listed short story collection, for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize. I know there are some writers who think of themselves as, I'm either a short story writer or I'm a novelist, or there's one form that feels most natural to me or most comfortable to me, and there are some writers who feel flexible and go between the two, and they just, different stories come to them at different lengths. For you, how do you think of it? How do the experiences of writing a short story or a collection of short stories or a novel compare? How do you approach them?
Well, I think the easy answer is that in short stories, you always think about what to take out. In a novel, you think what to put in. So that's a short version. I love both. And for a long time, I thought that I could only write short stories well enough to get them published. Until I met my agent, and that changed. However, because a novel grew out of a short story, that is to say that short stories can be developed into novels. I don't know if novels can be, shrunken into, short stories, but there's certainly the majestic Alice Munro, whose short stories, to me, they're mini novels. They're so dense and gorgeous and perfect. So it is a different skill, but it's not. In many ways, especially with literary fiction, we still, most of all, pay attention to language. And for me, if language was food, I'd be eating 24/7. It's all I live for is language. And, long time ago, I watched one of Toni Morrison's interviews, and she said, somebody asked her about her language, because you know how elaborate and gorgeous it is. Also very precise, very sharp, knife-like. And she said, well, the language must not sweat. And, and I was thinking about it. Now, what does she mean by it? We understand what she means by it, but it's a very precise phrase. The language must not sweat. So whenever I write, whether it's a short story or a novel, and, she's everywhere in my home, your books, her, pictures everywhere. And I'm thinking,
I see her behind.
Yeah, right. She's everywhere. I just finished an essay, my homage, my humble tribute to Toni Morrison will be published on Lit Hub on the 20th, I believe. So I always think, does my language sweat? What's going on? Is it, am I doing the right thing? So I pay astute attention to language. And everything starts with language, even though, first there was a sound and then there was a word, but it starts with the sound of that word. so you have to have that word to begin with. So
I'll say too, as your reader, it's such a joy to read not only someone who has a command of their language, who knows how to say something, but also who has something to say, that what is going on, the action that is happening, the characters that are brought to life in this exquisite language matter to us. The knife, you know how to wield the knife of the language. It's a joy. It's exquisite. We're gonna take a couple questions in the Q&A, but before we do, Kristina, I just want to ask you one last question very quickly, which is, what do you hope people get from the Orchard when they read it? What do you hope people, after they put it down, take away?
I'm hoping they would when they read the orchard, they would live a life that's otherwise they would have never lived or would have never known. They're not privy to that life, but in their hands, my generation comes alive. Those who died, fighting the regime. When we read something like dedicated to those people, they come to life. So you say their names, they're there in your room with you. So all I hope is that a person will open the book, will read that book to the end, and would say, I've learned something about those people. And I may know all of it, may not know all of it, but I know that story and what it was like to be those people. And if that happens, that's all I live for. I only know this one private, particular world, a piece of the world. And I would like for other people to know it too. So that's all I hope for.
I think that's a grand hope. And I will say for this reader, a hope realized that is the experience I had when I read.
Thank you.
Looking at the Q&A, we have a few questions here, and two of them I think are overlapping in a way. So I want to ask you those first. Matthew wants to know if you can talk a little more about the process of developing this full novel from the short story that was your starting point. What were the challenges you faced? Now that both have been published, how do you look at the relationship? And paired with that process question, I want to also submit to you Adam's question. It says, I'd love to hear more about the background that led you to this book. When did you decide to tackle this manuscript? How long did it take to come together? How did the experience match or differ from your expectations? To me, both of those are questions of process, questions of the development of the project. Will you tell us about it?
Right. Well, it took years. If I try to describe it, it might take just as long. But, with short stories, when I write a short story, I don't always know how they end because sometimes they surprise me. With the novel, at least this novel, I knew the ending, maybe because the short story was already written. And even though the short story originally had only two characters, Milka and Anya, and of course the novel has four main characters and then the cast, right? But still, I knew how it ended. So all I needed to figure out is how to get there. But also in the process, I needed to build enough conflict for the reader to follow. And, sometimes what is interesting to me might not be interesting to the reader, because some things are private and you feel nostalgic, that never leaves you. So you're drawn to those particular events and they're your darlings. But, I think Faulkner said, kill your darlings. So you have to kill them. You have to follow the story. And also, when I was a student at Radford University, and I did I did a creative thesis, so it had like 6 or 7 stories, I can't even remember. But anyway, when I was doing it, I was only learning how to tell stories, and one of my professors said, I was going, I don't know, how's this working? And he said, just cut the crap, tell the story. And just as I think about Morrison when she says the language might not sweat, I always think of that phrase too. Cut the crap, tell the story. And I know it's a funny advice, or maybe it's easy for someone to tell you that because how do you know what is the crap? What is not? But I always follow my instincts. The Orchard is really interesting because when my agent saw it first, and she did not take that novel, and she thought it read like a short story, even though it was 300 pages. And so I had to go back and rewrite it. Give it some depth, and I followed her advice and some other readers. And then when I finished it, it was like 420 pages. But later, when my editor bought the story, she wanted to be shorter. It was too long, and she wanted at least 100 pages gone. So it ended up being pretty much what it originally was, except some different, focus shifted from some chapters to another. But I think I learned a lot about my characters while I wrote the novel. And even though a lot of those pages did not make it into the novel, however, I felt so intimate with those characters that whatever I needed revising the novel later, it felt rather easy because I knew the characters that well. I've lived with them for years. And so there were no surprises. But the main thing I think is knowing where you're going, knowing the ending, which is very different from writing a short story. Because, they're like breaths. You take a breath and they're over. It's short. But, writing a novel is learning how to run a marathon. Just a little bit at a time, Because if you do it in one big leap or stretch, you're going to collapse. So I don't know if that's answered the question. I try.
I think that answers all the questions, and I think teaches us a lot too. We're getting toward the end of our time together. So I just want to thank you so much for talking with us, Kristina, for sharing your work and your thoughts and your wisdom with us. And of course, we want to thank Literati too for having us. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Julia, for reading my book.
Oh my God.
For questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
And make sure to go buy The Orchard. There, we have it on our website as well as coming in store. All righty. Have a good night, everybody.